Buonasera, good evening, benvenuti. Sono Roberto Cicutto, presidente della Biennale. Una giornata importante alla vigilia della chiusura della mostra internazionale d'architettura curata da Lesley Lokko. Ringrazio i nostri ospiti per essere qui a riflettere su qualcosa che ha rappresentato una grande novità per una Biennale di architettura come lo è stato l'anno scorso per arte. Tutte le attività di Biennale, arte, architettura, danza, musica, teatro e cinema, hanno un'attività di college, lo dico per chi è meno familiare con questa attività, che non significa formare degli artisti o degli architetti, significa scegliere, dopo una call pubblica, dei giovani artisti, in genere con un'età sotto i 30-35 anni, che, scelti sulla base di chi ha mandato l'application del curatore, passano un periodo di tempo a Venezia alla Biennale con dei tutor per produrre un qualcosa ovviamente che riguarda l'arte di cui si occupano. Può essere una coreografia, può essere una regia teatrale, può essere un film, può essere un'opera d'arte. Che cosa avrebbe potuto essere il prodotto di un college di architettura? Nessuno lo sapeva. Quindi ringrazio Lesley Lokko per aver accettato questa scommessa, perché l'idea di poter lavorare con 50 persone da tutto il mondo, scelte fra quasi 1 migliaio di domande che sono state presentate, senza chiedere loro di produrre un disegno, un progetto, un modellino di un edificio, ma di riflettere su che cos'è oggi occuparsi di architettura. Lei ha chiamato i partecipanti alla mostra internazionale non architetti ma practitioners e ha fatto qualche cosa di assolutamente innovativo. Ha chiamato tutti a un senso di responsabilità. Si è messa a disposizione attraverso l'esperienza non sua, ma del continente da cui proviene e dalle sue esperienze internazionali, perché la gente riflettesse sul senso di trasmettere l'architettura, riflettere sui valori e sui grandi problemi della contemporaneità. Il college non poteva che essere quindi un incontro fra persone molto diverse, che hanno creato anche momenti di tensione, conflitti, che non è stato facile, voglio dire, riportare a qualche cosa che potesse trovare una sua sintesi, cercare di documentare con un documentario, con un audiovisivo, tutte queste discussioni ed alcune esercitazioni, per poi cogliere quello che forse questa sera riusciremo a capire, il senso di questa esperienza. C'è però una frase che mi ha colpito fra l'enorme quantità di materiale audiovisivo che è stato girato. Un giovane dice: aver avuto la possibilità di passare quasi un mese a Venezia con l'unico dovere di riflettere e pensare è un'esperienza che non avrei mai potuto immaginare di vivere e per questo sarò grato per tutta la vita. Per me questo è già un grande risultato. Se Lesley ha messo persone che si accingono ad affrontare una disciplina così importante come è chiamata ad essere l'architettura oggi, e queste persone hanno potuto e avranno modo di trasmettere questa esperienza, credo che un college di architettura abbia un suo senso di esistere. Del resto, però, non penso che, come per tutte le altre discipline, si sa appunto qual è il punto di arrivo, i curatori delle prossime biennali di architettura adotteranno lo stesso sistema. Per me, che l'ho voluto e ho trovato una compagna di viaggio straordinaria come Lesley, è un'opzione aperta. Per me qualcuno potrebbe anche decidere di non continuare con l'attività di college e chi invece deciderà di farlo potrà disegnarlo secondo le proprie idee e il proprio modo di affrontare l'architettura. È un punto di partenza. Come tutta la mostra di Lesley non è un punto di arrivo, ma forse avrà completato qualche falla nel modo di affrontare i grandi temi dell'architettura. Grazie per essere qua, grazie a voi, grazie a Lesley.
Grazie mille, Presidente. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last but one event of the Carnival program, the 6-month-long program of events co-sponsored by Rolex that has been running since May this year to celebrate, test, and hopefully expand on the ideas presented in the Laboratory of the Future, which almost unbelievably closes tomorrow. Tonight's panel's discussion is centered around an experiment in both institutional and pedagogical terms, the first ever college program of the Biennale Architettura, as President Chikuta just mentioned. This was the first time a college was added to the curator's program, and it generated a great deal of discussion, mostly around its format, not just about its content. Unlike many of the other disciplines of the Biennale, it's not immediately obvious what the architectural equivalent of putting on a show or a performance or even an exhibition within an exhibition should be. In our sometimes quite heated discussions in 2022, we tossed many ideas around, including a masterclass, a small building project, an installation, and in the end I decided upon two things: a month-long teaching and learning experience that would address the same themes as the wider exhibition, decolonization and decarbonization, and a documentary which I thought would serve as a useful archive of the questions, format, teaching methods, and challenges. So tonight's panel discussion uses selected extracts from the 90-minute documentary All That Is Solid by the Spanish architect and filmmaker Ángel Borrego, which is still being edited, to tease out and structure a conversation around education, identity, power, conflict, community, and creativity, keeping the geographies, themes, and perspectives of the Laboratory of the Future in mind. I'm delighted to have on screen and in the audience many of the participants and tutors of the college with us, who will also join in the discussion, and I'm joined by 3 panelists, 2 of whom were actually tutors in the college. Eko Eshun, the writer and curator, was supposed to be with us, but was turned away from his flight by EasyJet yesterday morning for reasons that I still cannot understand. I'm going to try and introduce, moderate, facilitate the conversation simultaneously, so please bear with me. So on to the introductions. Rahesh Ram is an architect, educator, currently Associate Head of School at Greenwich University in London. He has taught across all areas of the architectural curriculum, from technology to speculative design, and is completing his PhD in architecture entitled Arabian Nights, Fiction and Architecture. His students have won many prizes, including RIBA medals and drawing prizes, and he was the co-unit lead in Unit 3 of this year's Biennale College Architettura. Next to him, Luca Molinari is an architectural critic and theorist, born in Milan, and I won't say the year. He is full professor of architecture, younger than me, at the University of Campania, Luigi Vanvitelli, and scientific director of the M9 Museo del 900 in Mestre, Venice. He is a curator and has exhibited in Italy and abroad, and collaborates as a consultant on the quality of architecture with numerous public and private institutions and organizations, both here and internationally. And Nana Biamah-Ofosu is an architect, educator, and researcher, director of YAA projects, and a lecturer at Kingston University in London. Her research interests include African modernity, its architecture and urbanism, and domesticity, identity, and geography. She's a regular contributor to leading architecture and design journals and was co-unit lead in Unit 2 of this year's college. We also have a great number of the participants who took part in the college with us online and in the audience, as well as many of the tutors. There are too many to name individually, but I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone, not only for being here tonight, but for your participation, your openness, courage, and honesty during the college, which I think we will all agree was one of the most challenging experiences we have ever undertaken. And in fact, this was my comment to the tutors on the last day, and I decided to open tonight's panel discussion with it to illustrate how the complexity of the topic matter turned the dynamic of tutor-student upside down. If I were to do this again, and this is probably not going to be a very popular sentiment, I would not have invited participants. I spent more time on tutors than on participants. And actually the crisis of education starts with us as educators. So the documentary is still under edit. There were over 700 hours of footage, and I was simply too exhausted after the opening in the college to be able to think clearly enough about how to structure it or what the narrative could or should be. It is such important material that I need time, distance, and resources to do the editing. So I have extracted several sections which were sent last week, and what you'll see tonight are the first passes at collating the material. Not all the units and participants are represented in these sections. With over 70 people involved, it's quite a task to ensure that everyone is represented, but that will be our job over the next few months. The idea is that the documentary remains as an important archive and teaching tool, not just for future curators, but for everyone interested in architectural education and where, how, and why we respond to the crises and conditions of our time. To the panel and to our online guests, and then take questions if there are any from the audience at the end. I think one of the most important things to say is that the college was very much conceived as part of the exhibition, not just in terms of its subject matter, but perhaps more importantly in terms of its audience. This is, I believe, the youngest ever Biennale in terms of the average age of participants, and I wanted very much to address it to the future, to speak about the future and of the future. I selected 15 tutors, some of whom I knew as teachers, some as colleagues, and some I met for the first time in February. I imagine that the ongoing discussion about the wisdom of the unit system format, where groups of students choose tutors, subject matter, and vice versa, will continue. But for better or worse, it's the system that I most closely identify with, am most familiar with, and in my opinion at least, produces the best results. It's not without its critics, of course, and there are as many ways to do this as there are curators, exhibitions, and colleges. There is another reason why I chose this format, which pays tribute to Jonathan Hill, who died 3 weeks ago. Jonathan was one of the most influential educators of the past 30 years. He taught both Rahesh and I, and was one of my closest friends. His unit from the Bartlett is here in Venice this weekend, and he should have been here with them. Everything I know about education, I owe to Jonathan. He was the first person in a position of authority whom I had ever met who treated me as an equal, not as an equity or diversity quotient, not as a problem to be tackled, patronized, or guided, but as an equal, someone with as much right to imagination, curiosity, critique as anyone else. My race, gender, nationality, and background were important, but only in service of what I could think, what I could make, and what I could say. He was the first person to suggest 30 years ago that there might be more to the story of architecture than I was being taught. Irrespective of whether you agree with him, it was the basis and premise of this exhibition, and its spirit and his fills not just this room, this theatre, but is throughout the Arsenale, Central Pavilion, and beyond.
Hello, my name is Gloria. I am a human rights practitioner.
Hello, my name is Yara. Hello, I'm Umia Sheikha, a young artist who is studying
My name is Mark Serra. I'm 23 years old. I am from Maputo, Mozambique. I study
I have been working within and outside of academia on experimental and design for studies and understanding of Western society dedicated to art and architecture. In addition to these studies, my participation in this program.
We all met in June, and I have to say that the behind-the-scenes logistics of bringing 70 people to Venice cannot be underestimated. What the world sees, of course, the experiment or the experience, but the real labor, the back-breaking, endless hours, the never-ending administration and logistics that invariably go wrong, generally go completely unnoticed, sometimes even by those who take part. I would like to acknowledge everyone who made this happen, from the technical teams, the administrators, the tutors, the restaurant staff, and of course the participants. Over 3 days of intense negotiations, smiles, tears, occasional outbursts, we managed to divide the group into 7 units with very distinct and different ways of approaching the topics of decolonization and decarbonization, which was the premise of the college from the beginning. And off they went.
It was a big deal for us to come from Australia. We had it.
Nowadays, we find it difficult to think negatively about the word professional. The word itself is imbued with distinction, with status, refinement, and learning, of course. You become a professional through learning, through practice, through examination, through evaluation. But if we look at the opposite of the word professional, the word amateur, another distinction emerges. The word amateur comes from Latin, amator, the one who loves and loves again. Unlike the specialist, the professional, the amateur can afford to lose. To my mind, it is the amateur in us that we must seek to encourage, not the professional. The one who loves and loves again, the one who tries and tries again, who pursues new ways of thinking, making, seeing, doing, without the fear of failure. That is my role model, and I hope in the course of the next 4 weeks, it will also be yours.
In a lot of African cultures, traditionally the building is done by women, and it's a communal thing, it's an annual thing, and so the position of the people who make the space is a totally different, philosophical approach to the process of making space. So for me, even the process by which you make architecture can fundamentally shift the outcome. And I think for me that was what was interesting about this experiment with this unit, because they said that this morning. For them, the process of working in this kind of collective, kind of intuitive, slightly intuitive way, they had to sometimes put aside their egos when their design decisions weren't popular with the rest of the unit, and I think that is maybe a new way of working that points to a kind of different type of method of producing architecture.
Let's do this!
Why do you see that as a failure?
Because we haven't managed to have any conversations about the actual materiality, about labor discussions, about team structures, and also about the island itself.
That was our preferred outcome for the studio, that those discussions will have happened. But it's again one of these things that we couldn't foresee.
No.
Close for everybody. Everybody's here now. We'll get everybody up.
We need to move it to where the Australian pavilion is. That's where Lorenzo's boat is. We store it for today, and then in the afternoon, Paolo comes. Venga, let's start moving. Ask Lorenzo.
So, as you can see now, there are two parts of the island. The part that we already have is this little peninsula in the middle. One very important goal that we will have will be just to make people able to visit the island. That many friends, Venetians, they never been here. And in a sense, it's very important this place because it shows that Venice is not only about the Carnival or the Baroque.
What is your vision for the future for this place?
So again, now having a low impact presence. The first goal is to make people able to visit it. And then refreshing always with cultural activities.
And how do you want to ensure that it becomes accessible to everyone who would like to come?
Very easily through a ferry. Through a very specific ferry. I'm not really interested for this. I didn't ask about a public boat because it really creates a different vibe.
Do you think that's gatekeeping? I suppose the question is who gets to decide that, or why do they have the right to control who can access this?
I mean, it's a bit the contrary in a sense, because now nobody can access. So when you do it in your possibility and in your, so it's already an openness, it's not a closure.
We also need to take some decisions prior, because otherwise we'll be for weeks deciding these things and it's limited. You need to believe on it.
This is more of a workshop, and I've done plenty of workshops, but this wasn't really presented as a workshop in a sense, as in it seems to me that it seemed like we would have more input and would be more exploratory, and we would be part of the discussion. And I understand the logistics side, I completely get that, because I've also been on the logistics side of workshops where you do have to meet and you have a short time and it is really stressful. But it almost feels, because of that, like yesterday there was a lot of conversations, and like yes, we went and looked at material, but anytime we picked up a material, it was like, no, you can't use that material because that'll disintegrate, because we didn't understand what we were doing.
Well, we were doing a boat, but these things, no, I think...
I know, but I feel like the boat was already designed, which then it felt like... I'm just saying this is what it feels like for me right now.
But again, I think the role of the architect is not only the design of the thing, and that's why also we are trying to expand.
I have a bit of sense of frustration that I don't feel so much, and I try to tell them that we have to enjoy the most of the place.
Today we need to give them very clear logistics, and I think we need to clarify certain things.
Specifically ask for the tutors presenting the work of edizione. There are many ways in which these cross things could happen. To decide if we want to follow the format or not is a thing that it's open, right? You can say, no, we're going to present ourselves, we'll be okay. Or if not, we're going to, Filippa is going to present, it's also okay. But I think you need to be aware of that you're either breaking the format, which is, we're absolutely fine with it, or you actually provide us with enough information to build up, to present something that is up to your standards.
Oh no, yeah, but I think in terms of, I think we need to talk about how we got to where we are. There's also still we're not all still on the same page. So I think we need to present that, because I think that actually is, that's the difficulty, but that's also the opportunity. It's how are we going to overcome this and move forward? And I think people are interested in that, and I think from talking to other units, it also seems like we keep assuming that the other units know what's happening because we have no conversations with them. But really, they don't know. Like, they're all interested, so I think this is a platform for something rather than a platform for nothing. You know, both to do nothing and both to do something. So I think we need to also present this discussion that we've been having and difficulties and whatever.
we don't have enough time to think about a well-established enough proposition to put on the table as much as you guys have thought about. I mean, you had 3 months to think about it, and it's so well curated, and I understand that. So at this point, I will say for me personally, I think we've had 2 weeks to do discussions, to do critique on the workshop and all of that, and I'm aware of what is critical about the workshop. But at this point, I will offer my labor to build the boat. Or
No. Let's be very honest.
Yeah.
If you're coming to the workshop, it's not for labor. So if you're coming there as a laborer to move things, then don't do it.
Okay.
Don't.
And even if it's the case with like these different outcomes or whatever, I still think they can all intertwine. Like for me, I'm not necessarily interested in building the platform, and whether it's about documenting, I'm interested in documenting all these conversations we have and everything for an outcome, but I'm also interested in the teenagers on that side because it's a community that already exists. But also I'm more than happy to help out the platform team with, if they need help.
The notion that we wanted you to be labor, I'm not entirely sure where that started. Lorenzo's doing all the heavy liftings with the restrictions of the Biennale. It's not a labor exercise, right?
Oh no, I just mean in terms of...
I think we need to be clear about that. If you want to engage with the building of this thing, you come with a creative mindset. You come with the idea that you want to have some R&D around the materials in that yard. So let's get out of the structure. So I'm throwing the responsibility on you firmly. You're going to decide for the next 48 hours, what is it that you do with this unit at this college?
So if a part of the group feel that doesn't make sense really to jump into constructing, in my opinion, it's so important that they pass their time meditating about that place or even elements in general. So as I was telling you before, the most important thing for me is that they pass time there. So I'm available every day from the Arsenale. It's like 10 minutes, we can always make to go there and stay, and that's important.
So we're negotiating 3 dimensions: the dimension of the steel, the dimension of the deck, and the dimension of the polystyrene.
I think it's a mess because if you cut the steel, then you have to weld it. So it's this kind of endless. I think the less we cut, the better. Like the pieces, they are stable. So before we go to the polystyrene, let's close the question of how we put things together. I think that is the
Yes, my opinion is that we should do something.
So we go for that. Is that okay?
Yeah. Lorenzo, passiamo all'italiano perché è
You
importante.
can use them as if they are already whole, you can place it here. And use them as one here and one here. And so this is to connect
and
reinforce the bolting connection.
So I am trying to find the most economical way to use plywood sheets. So I mean, we're talking about decarbonization, so I don't want to be wasting materials. I think some of us are on board with the idea of building a boat, because I mean it sort of the unit framing statement. Yeah, and I mean that is what they sold us. Yeah, but I think some others might have some questions about, how much autonomy they have in this process. But I think there was definitely less in the beginning, but then we were given more freedom to, choose the way we want to design the substructure as well as the structure above the boat. So yeah, I think it's kind of a 50-50 split between those who want to build a boat and those who don't.
Are we doing this boat just to do it, or is someone believing on it? I don't understand. I get the feeling there is some interest, right?
I don't think I understand the question.
To maintain peace.
She is asking, if I'm correct, who wants to build the boat?
It was the tutor's idea, the tutor's material. I honestly don't care about it. Like, I'm more interested in other things, and if it comes to the end of the day and like say I'm finished doing whatever I'm doing at 3 o'clock and you guys are still doing the boat, then I'll come over and help because I still see you guys as part of our team. And if you guys want to do this, then I'll help out. But that's absolutely not my priority.
Let's go!
For some reason, queer strategies has always been about the loudness, and how people perceive it from the outside is also about the loudness. But is there any like some form of subtlety that we can maybe infuse these important things slowly? I'm thinking like when you're like putting like a bag of tea, like it's just like the tea slowly infused, and then it becomes like all of a sudden that kind of like water that is like the default or whatever, it changed, it becomes something new.
As I'm talking, someone's gonna pass me. I mustn't step too close in front of her or step too close behind her. I need to give her room so she can pass, things like that. It's like it makes you more spatially aware.
Pop, but from the back. So like she will peel off from you.
Okay, oh, the reactions!
This is not even like people stop by and say it's really good and really that. People taking pictures. And then everyone right now will have to listen to the drop of the music, and then that's the cue for dancing. And so all the crowds will dance with you as well. Action! Oh, and then use that one. Okay. From me here, go straight.
Okay.
Go straight in front of me.
Okay, so I'm going straight. Yeah?
This is not okay. This is not okay. You're gonna be okay.
We're gonna be okay. We got this, we got this, we got this.
It's on the floor. On the floor. Are you gonna take it? You're the monster or you're the person?
I'm the monster when he passes me, right?
What kind of monster are you? Like, are you like rolling and take it? You say you want to be like gracious, but
gracious, but I'm waking up.
Is that working? Yeah. So I've selected now 5 direct to-camera interviews with participants, one of which is in Spanish. And I learned Premiere the other night from a YouTube video in order to make these edits, and it didn't say anything about subtitles, so my apologies for that. I can loosely translate the interview afterwards, but I'm sure there are many people who speak Spanish in the audience. And then the last slide, a very, very short one, goes to Khalid Dangor, a South African participant, who I think summed up the overriding challenge that I certainly saw in the 4 weeks of the college. And I'm curious to see and hear what others experienced, bearing in mind that it is as important to learn when not to speak as it is to figure out what to say. So there are 5 very short interviews now.
I think this was life-changing, and I don't actually know what the impact is going to be. It's too soon to say, but I will say that because of the team that put this together, because of Lesley's dream, a person like me is able to be here to occupy this space in a way that historically couldn't have been done before. And so, above everything, I just have the utmost gratitude to every single person that worked on this team. I'm going here definitely changed, definitely grateful. This is a gift, a real gift. So thank you, everyone, every single person, the ones that I've met, the ones that have been involved. I know I'll see you again soon.
And we haven't been thanking her enough, and I would like her to see that for herself, that this is all her creation. So yeah, it's her story. We're going to see what's going to happen next. It's a big benchmark task. So whoever is going to curate this next, eyes on you.
Pues para mí, lo que es toda la experiencia de la Bienal es una cosa tan contradictoria como increíble, porque nunca había imaginado llegar a un lugar como este, haciendo las cosas que quiero hacer con mi vida, a las que me dedico, y que tenga la oportunidad de realmente poder dar alguna opinión sobre algo. Entonces, que te abran la puerta a países como del que yo vengo, para que hagas lo que tú quieras hacer realmente y te pongas a pensar un mes entero de pensar todos los días, todo el día. Yo creo que eso es lo más increíble que me llevo de este evento.
I've never been more grateful for an experience like this. It has changed my life for the better in so many ways, because before I came here, I didn't know that my passion for music and architecture and art could intersect into one.
I think being given the space to protest was a really powerful, just a whole experience for me, because I think in the normal world there's bigger implications, whether that's about your job, your grade. So I think this was, as a laboratory, to have that chance to protest without implications and to also get the chance to really claim our voice was really important.
I always consider myself a multifaceted individual, and now I see that it wasn't that, it was multifaceted. It was all coming together in one glorious mosaic of all my different interests, all my different talents. I didn't know that an opportunity like this for a girl like me would have been possible. When I applied for it, I didn't think I was gonna get accepted. I didn't think anything of it. And when I received it, I bawled my eyes out because it felt like my grandmother's prayers, my great-grandmother's prayers, and my mother's prayers had finally been manifested. So I'm not just standing here as myself, but I'm standing here as someone who is a manifestation of like all these generations and all these dreams just come to life.
I challenged myself and I put myself out of my comfort zone. I prefer not to work at 1:1 scale. Lesley, you mentioned that Africa as the laboratory of the future was the initial title, and I think that should have been kept. because I think that was a fact too often forgotten. Because what allyship is giving someone the platform to speak. Not speaking louder than, not speaking for, not speaking on behalf of, but listening. And you can't be listening if you're speaking. I noticed there's a gap between, it's not just ethnicities that play a role in shaping our perspective, but also geography. And there was a gap between the global north and the global south. And I can't articulate exactly what that gap is yet, but I think with some time and distance from this college, I might be able to. Thank you.
I'm going to try and structure the conversation between three audiences, the panel, the participants on Zoom, and the audience. And to make it as smooth and interesting as I hope as possible, I'm going to start with the panel, then I'm going to ask our participants on Zoom to put questions or observations, it doesn't have to be a question, into the chat, which I'll read as the discussion unfolds, and I will ask you to switch on your microphones. And this is bound to be a little bit messy, but that's just the nature of an event like this. And I'll then open it as an in-person back and forth with the audience in case you have observations or questions you'd like to direct to us. So I'm going to start with Rahesh and Nana and ask if you can sum up the college experience in a word, a sentence, or a phrase. Or was the experience something that requires more time, more depth, and more reflection?
For me, for the kind of person I am, probably need more time. But all I can say, it was a moment that probably produced one of the greatest pedagogic experiences of my educational life. And that means I learned a lot from the participants, as much as I learned from the other tutors. There was one moment which changed everything for me.
Do you want to say a little bit more about the moment?
So we did this, the radical empathy brief that we set was, let's face it, radical empathy is the only thing that's going to kind of change the planet the way we want it to be changed. So we looked at the idea of empathy, and we asked the question, we looked at different scales of empathy. Empathy between individuals, empathy with the land, empathy with groups, with different types of groups, empathy, different types of empathy. So one of the things that happened was, because we're all strangers coming to this magical city, we set this project where we had participants discuss something about themselves to each other, which was a private conversation. Now we set the parameters of that so it doesn't go into the dangerous territories, but we set the parameters that ask questions like, who do you love? Who do you think you are? All those things that we never stopped to kind of answer. And then the next day, after that conversation, they had to come back and produce this, an object that reflected the conversation. Now, so the next day came, the participants kind of pushed me and Marina, my teaching partner, to do the same thing. And so the next day, they started to present to each other and give gifts back to the person they talked to. Now, what that did was, so they started to explain what they found fascinating about each other's culture, what they empathize with. And they started giving these amazing gifts. They were only given 20 euros or something to actually make something. So it could be, so some wrote a poem, some had a dress that they wrote on, and some sang a song or made a song, or did a diagram. Now, while each one was speaking, they started crying, they started getting really emotional about each other. And before you know it, one person, they started crying, the next person started talking, and they started crying. The next person, I started talking, and I started crying. So the whole room was crying, and when the documentary makers were there, I looked at the cameraman, and he was crying, right? So the whole place was just crying. But it created this amazing moment where the idea of making something for something that was so precious was quite interesting. So if you empathize, and then you had to make something for that, making became really difficult. So they had one night to do it, and that showed that if you know enough about each other, empathize with something or something, you would generally want to do something beautiful in return. Now that moment that we all came together changed our way of being, way of working. It was full of trust. It enabled trust, enabled care, understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. And that whole connection between that group went right the way through the whole 2.5 weeks. And we made things out of joy, intuition, gut instincts, and pure, inspired by each other. And it just changed the way we worked. And it just shows this kind of incubator that we were put in really changed the way of thinking. And it just made me realize that education is not just about offering information, but it's kind of enabling the kind of emotional content of the participants and that to come forth. So for me, it was a serious pedagogic experience that I'll keep with me forever, really.
Nana? I suppose perhaps the word I'd use is testing. And I think that it sort of speaks across various ways of reading this. In some ways, it summarizes what the laboratory and the theme of the Biennale was. It's a testing ground to experiment and to develop ideas. But then also, it's testing when you put 70 people together. It becomes a site that sometimes becomes fraught. There are emotional exchanges. But all through that, there's learning and discovery and unlearning, and sometimes challenging kind of different views that come across. And so for me, that the experiment here was literally in the testing of ideas. And that was a really enriching thing. And I suppose to summing this up, or whether it can be summed up now, I often think about teaching as something that happens in different phases of time. So there's a lesson for right now, and we saw that in the college. There were days and the kind of lesson or something that had impact straight away. And there's something that came to bear maybe 3 weeks later. And then I think there's also the long-term kind of what this brings forth. And so I think in terms of reflections, for me, it's in those stages. I can reflect on the 3 weeks we were here and sort of summarize what's learned there. But then there's also the long-term effects that a college like this has that I think are yet to be unpacked, and they need time. And I suppose that's also what the college was. It was a real gift of time. 3.5 weeks with 70 people to really be able to challenge, talk. And sometimes I think that the value of kind of speaking is lost in our world of kind of an intense need to always produce. And so for me, in really centering the process in this, there was an idea that the process is the valuable thing here. It's not about the artifact that's always produced. And even when participants in certain units were producing something, you could really see that the process was the thing that was driving this thing. And I think, for me, what was a real gift in that 3.5 weeks was the ability to have time. There was an urgency, but also an understanding that this is a long time thing. So scale, time, urgency were always things that the kind of, for me, felt really present as something that we needed to think about. And I just think that kind of gift of a place to test is something that will stay with me.
I mean, picking up on that slightly, I mean, Luca, do you think that the themes are too broad for a college of 4 weeks?
No. I think that, education matters in this moment. It's really a core. Since we are facing such a changing situation, we are living a deep metamorph, which is putting under discussion all the basics of the enlightenment of the Western culture in the last 500 years. We are really living an age of radical changes. And facing such radical changes today, education is at the center, must be at the center. And I think that one of the most important lessons I'm listening from you is that those weeks has been a place of full freedom. That this is what we need today. Universities, schools, cultural institutions should be the place of critical freedom where each one can express itself. Empathy is very much important. We move from performances to empathy. And this is fundamental because we move from a typically functionalist approach to education to something which helps people to express themselves, to find out what they can do together with the other in dialogue. So empathy means myself and the other. This is fundamental. The shift is from individual to community and changing communities, no? So what we need in the next year is a stronger critical empathy in relation to a world which is changing, which is provoking such a huge questions that each of us has a fully political responsibility to change the tools we have been using. For me, decolonizing means decolonizing the words we are using. Yeah. Which is fundamental, because if we share words which has been polluted by the previous century, we cannot find solutions. So we need to decolonize the words and then to give a freedom to the youngest generation to express something we are not ready for. And I think this is the real political responsibility of the institution, the cultural institution, the education institution for the next decades. We need to change the basics. Instead, we will not find solutions. We are just using old tools, no? And this makes education so central from this political approach. So I think it's fundamental that this college is expressing very well the title of your Biennale, which is the Laboratory of the Future. This college was the laboratory. And this is very important that you see the exhibition, but in the meantime, you have people working inside the exhibition. This makes it a real laboratory, no? Because you cannot have an exhibition with these 4 months of changing things, no? So to have a laboratory inside the exhibition, I think is fundamental. This makes an institution alive, not just a representation, but a collaboration.
I mean, I suppose one of the things that came up, and it's partly why I showed that clip of all the participants speaking, was we asked people who applied to the college to write a statement and then give us a 1-minute video. And we found that many of the statements were written by ChatGTP. So we had to use a different register to figure out what are people like. And it was very interesting that a 1-minute video gives you some insight into something, and you're using the same tools in a sense. Can I identify with that person? Can I figure out what it is that they're trying to say? Is there something in their expression that's saying something to me? So in some senses, it was a very old way of deciding, but also a very intuitive way. So it was challenging. I mean, Rahesh, we only saw snippets of your unit's many discussions, performances, workshops, and so on. And you talked about empathy as being a real highlight of the experiment. Can you say more about one or two other highlights that were not to do with the personal? Was it to do with making things? Was it to do with public performance? Like, what were some of the highlights for you?
I mean, that whole 3 weeks was a series of many highlights. And it started off with that empathetic moment. But there was amazing conversations we had in terms of, because it started off by re-looking at where our knowledge is situated. The fact that we've been brought up in a kind of Cartesian world, and we were starting to look at other forms of knowledge, such as belief systems, rituals, mythologies, storytelling, and we wanted to use other forms of thinking. And so one was about emotional feelings and so on. And so we had a few lectures from the great Cecilia Vicuna gave a talk to like 6 of us, and she was like almost like a prophetic saint that entered the room through Zoom, and talked to us about what she thinks is empathy, about it's empathy to the self, empathy towards materials, empathy towards inanimate things, and we also had a Silje Indigenous member who's an artist who also talked about the precariousness of materials and not giving materials hierarchy, and she composed her things based on fragility rather than the usual ways of thinking. The fact that she uses no glue, she uses no other forms of mechanical fixings, and uses marble as much as a piece of driftwood in the same composition. So there were these moments which have made, kind of added to the conversation of empathy towards things. But in terms of the idea of, we did a series of performances. So every week we had to do a kind of show and tell event. So again, I really liked the video which didn't have me in it, which was great, right? Mainly because we decided to dismantle the hierarchy of the group. So the idea that I was the tutor and they were the participants, we got rid of that. So the idea was we work as a group and we work as into it. And then what that enabled is to trust of the other group, the members of the group, to be really the kind of sole runners of each project. And so we started using different ways of representation rather than architecture drawings, models and things. We started looking at presenting things through song, through poetry, through making things and tents which uses no glue. And we had these most profound moments of offerings to the rest of the group that enabled us to think differently about architecture. So when Bonnie was talking about the fact that her music and her other interests all came into being, we wanted to encourage that. The use of every part of your creative force comes together to make things. And when they were making together, the idea of working as a group, so we worked through intuition. So what would happen is just before the actual day we had to present, we used to meet up, and then we just used to go for it. We used to make things and intuitively respond to each other's reactions to make the event. So again, it was through those kind of things about intuition, trust, and letting people sing with their own voice was really important. And in fact, it showed in each of the presentations.
So Nana, I'm going to ask you the kind of diametric opposite of that. What were some of the most challenging aspects?
I think, so the unit I ran with Samir Pandya was titled Decolonial Atmospheres. And we used the kind of roundtable format quite a lot. It was a way of convening a discussion. And I think one of the things that I found challenging at times is that to hold a discussion sort of needs rules. It needs kind of terms of engagement. There are people who will always feel able to speak, and they will speak first, and they will define the tone of the conversation. And typically, I think actually, as Khaled identified, that gap between the global south and the global north was something that played out often. And in a unit dealing with decoloniality, dealing with the idea of decolonial atmospheres, really centered on the idea of an autobiography, perhaps those were some of the kind of more challenging moments where there are people that feel that they have a right to a space, to come to a space and speak into that space. And there are others that, I think for many reasons, don't feel that ability or that they have the right. And I think that for me was something, that played out not just in our kind of unit, but also I think throughout the college, who has the right to speak. And even in some of the clips that we've seen this evening, the idea of speaking, refusing to speak, protest. I think there was some really interesting commentary there about protesting without consequence. I would challenge that and ask that well, who gets to protest without consequence? There are very few people in the global south that will ever be their norm. So I think in this college, this experiment, it really revealed the kind of power dynamics that I think are central to creating a new way of thinking about education. Yeah. And that is a challenge, especially when you're thinking about this in the backdrop of kind of, 500 years of a very prescriptive relationship between one part of the world and the other. Education needs to really, to transform, some people need to be quiet mm-hmm. And to listen and to really hear. And I think that is a challenge in both directions. It's also for the global south to speak, to speak with a certain confidence, to realize that we also hold the center, that the center shifts, but with that shift comes a responsibility to really hold that center. And so for me, that there were things that were challenges, but I come away from them thinking about a real moment that could become transformational, that those things are not just things that have to remain challenges that we sort of wallow in, but actually it's a moment to really sort of hold the center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Luca, we put forward the argument, certainly in the exhibition, that decolonization and decarbonization are two of the most pressing concerns of our time. And how do these themes sit within the Italian educational landscape?
This is a good, nice question. Well, I think that decarbonization and decolonization should be a central core of education mostly everywhere. Italy is facing, let's say, a social pressure for equality, which is after pandemia, the split between economical classes and cities and what we call periphery has been stronger. So, talking about decolonization for us it means also talking about equality. In the meantime, we are facing urgent, as everywhere in the world, in Europe, a strong climate change pressure, which calls solutions and choices, which is political choices, but in the meantime, to define design solution. Design doesn't mean only just being buildings. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that most of things will be done in reusing things, in not building something new. We have to really change the paradigms. No? If I think that in most of our university, we still teach how to build something new as we are in the mid-20th century, where we have an economic boom and a pressure of economic which have not now anymore. So we should deal with design with fragility, for example, with equality, with the idea that architecture means a living organism, which is changing continuously, and we must be so generous, enough open to guess something we are not expecting. So this idea that form follow function should be completely forget, because forms follow generosity, forms follow something we cannot predict. Mm-hmm. So architecture should be able to welcome as an open house something we are not able to predict, but strong enough to guess something that the next future generation will need, no? So this is very important. It's an amazing challenge for us, because on one side we have on the table everything. We don't need to build more, but we need to reimagine everything. I always say that everything we consider abandoned is just abandoned in our eyes. Yeah. Buildings are there, objects are there. Abandon is our failure. So, which means that the idea of abandonment calls for new tools, new vision, new radical approach. Radicality today means ambitions in relation to the fact that reality, society is asking for new solutions, no? Which makes architecture so important, no? And so different from so important.
I'm going to come back to this question at the end, but there's a question from our online panel from Abdul Rauf Isahak, which says, in a teacher-student relationship, or in this case, the tutor-participant relationship, what contributes to a successful process of knowledge exchange? How would you answer that, Nana?
I think I'll go back to this idea of listening. and listening not to answer or retort, but actually to take in what somebody is saying. And I think that is so key, actually, the act of listening with generosity, with the openness that you might learn something new, with the openness that you might be challenged, that you might have to rethink what you think you know. And so for me, that is that's a really useful way of transmitting knowledge. It's really centering listening first rather than speaking. I always think about, in architectural education, the model for a long time has been that as a tutor, you know, in a design studio, you already kind of have the answers, and you set a design project, which you're probably maybe working on in an office, or, you know, you've already done, and your students become the kind of test bed for that. And I've always kind of critiqued that. And for me, the excitement of the college program was that could go away, that actually it wasn't about us necessarily impacting knowledge, but it was figuring it out together. Mm-hmm. And that figuring out together requires deep listening. And I think it's what Rahesh has been saying, is that empathy, it's that willingness, that openness to really engage with somebody, not to retort or not to extract, but to consider yourselves in conversation with one another.
Mm. So I'm going to ask this question to Luca again. Sort of, is this model of teaching, exploring, something that might be useful beyond a setting like a Biennale college? I mean, I think one of the participants said something about there being no risk attached. There were no grades, there was no accreditation, there was no certificate. In a sense, you were free to think. Do you think this can be useful beyond this space?
I think so, and some universities are also experimenting a moment of freedom apart from the traditional courses. You know, you can have a period of few weeks where different generation and even other people from other disciplines could join on a very strong and shared project, which is a place where liberty is the argument, where you can share, you can exchange, you can play, you perform something different, and which I think would be fantastically strong for the everyday education, because it's let's say the green place is a place of pleasure where you join and you have something different, but in the meantime you are in the same place, which shows that education is strong enough to give you freedom. I think this should give every university a stronger authority, which is not the authority of the father, but it's a place where you welcome everybody to express and to produce something which is also unexpected. So I think it would be very healthy for tutors, first of all, and students.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely my experience that the challenges of this college were experienced as directly by the tutors as they were by the participants. So in a sense, this was new ground for many people, no matter how close you were to the subject matter. And just to come back to Nana again, I mean, if I think back to my own experience as a student 30 years ago, I don't think in my wildest dreams I could ever have imagined an experience like this. So in a sense, it shows how long it's taken, but also how far actually education has come, that something like this was possible. You're a generation behind me, or maybe a little bit more. I mean, did this feel like it had been waited for a long time for you as well?
Yeah, completely, absolutely. And I think even perhaps in my own education, that also felt like a moment like this couldn't be. And that was, you know, just over a decade ago. But that's, a moment like this felt like it was necessary, it was needed. And I think in the videos that the participants submitted, you really could sense that. I mean, I was watching that when they were all speaking, and their words that kind of creep up again and again, and sentiments that creep up again and again, and you could really, for me, the energy of the college was something that felt palpable, that it'd come to a moment of sometimes crisis as well, and that crisis of waiting. That crisis of waiting for something to happen, and it never happens, it never moves forward. And then a moment like this, it can become quite fraught because everybody wants to solve something in that moment, wants to find the solution right now, and it sometimes becomes loaded with the idea that this college has to solve everything. And actually, that's really debilitating if you feel that in this moment, you've got to get everything right because, you need to prove that this is a worthy experiment. And I think that moment of waiting, I think you could really feel that. And it is interesting that it's taken this long, but also this quickly. So there's a paradox in that. There's a paradox in the idea of how we've registered time here. So thinking about how long a journey it's taken for something like this to become part of a kind of architectural education and the discourse, but also how quickly we feel that we need to address this with a certain urgency. And for me, that's still something I'm sort of trying to think through, how to kind of register that sense of urgency. Sometimes it's useful, and sometimes it can also feel like a burden.
So there's one comment that's just come in from somebody which I think is really interesting. He says that the experience of the college and architecture is greatly influenced by narrative more than we think of it. I came in contact with narratives that I hadn't been in contact with before. And what is challenging for me now in my studies is the feeling that there is no narrative, there's no story to tell, there's nothing to experience, just things to learn. How do you respond to that?
I'm not sure what he means completely by that, because we're always learning. We're always at the moment we're in the confluence of climate crisis, social injustice, and technological kind of revolution. They're all colliding at one point. New narratives are being built all the time. New ways of thinking, new ways of working and interacting with people is changing all the time. So I think the new narratives are being built, new things are you need to learn, you need to kind of interact with the ideas of new formations of thinking against what we need to achieve in terms of that.
I agree, but I suppose also what a student or a participant like this is saying is that he or she is very aware of new narratives emerging all around us, but education is not giving you the tools to figure out how to tell those narratives. I mean, I sound like a broken record, but if I had $1 for every time I've been told that what I do is not architecture, I could have retired 40 years ago. So this constant kind of battle as to what is considered canon, what is considered a tool, what is considered viable, seems to be really at odds with a context that is somehow pushing us to change. And there's this incredible resistance to giving up the ghost in a way.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, going back slightly, it's related. I think the universities find it really difficult to shift from their position because they have to answer to the professional bodies. So all our curriculum is based around that. And to do this kind of experiment where you come out of that trajectory is really useful to start thinking about these new narratives, how to work with these new shifts, So I think, in fact, these new kinds of pedagogic events are needed more and more because universities can't change. It's like moving a big ship, trying to turn it around. You can't. Yeah. And it's possible.
So, I mean, just to go to Luca for a second. Somebody has asked, how do we think that the Biennale experience, the experience of the college, might change the way of practicing architecture? That's a big one. Yeah.
No, it's a big question, but I mean, it's if you have a different and more personal and more aware points of view on things, you design differently. I mean, practice is just not technical approach to reality. It's not anymore problem solving as well. It's something more complex. And to face a reality which is providing different questions, you need a different approach, which is a critical approach, a very personal approach. You must be aware about yourself, about your desire, about your knowledge, about your education. The awareness today is fundamental to be a real professional. So I think it's to be a fantastic professional in the future means to be a different person with a strong way of thinking. So this kind of situation provides that, a different way of thinking, a different way of looking to things, no? To change your position, body and mind and eyes in relation to what you're looking for, and to exchange it with other people, because sharing and working between different disciplines means being a different professional, designing something different, providing spaces different from different people that are asking something different in an urgent time. So I think this is fundamental.
So I'm going to open this up to the audience in case there are any observations or questions for anyone, and I've got a couple online as well, so go ahead.
It's not working.
Can we
try?
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. My name is Dora. I have an NGO about art and architecture, about engaged ones. And I've been coming to the Biennale for many years. And I have to say that there will be definitely a before and after. Because when I see this audience, I think you're very good of mixing generations and disciplines. And it's really the first time that I see that much, in fact. And we always focus about where we all come from, but I think we should even more focus about hope of transmissions, because to see a mix of generation like this here, I think it's a real big hope. So my question is, in fact, Venice is a special place. For sure, it's magical, because it's an island, and there's many economic model and social models were born here. And I'm very happy about all what you said, Professor Luca and all of you, about empathy, about to get new ideas. Because the lockdown concept was created here, the ghetto one was created here, and the fact that there's no cars and it's an island, I think you can guess for sure new ideas. So what will be next after this laboratory of future? Because I know you create many schools in different parts of the world, and I'm very emotional about this Biennale, I have to say, so you have to excuse me. But what I wanted to say is it possible to recycle this laboratory of future, this Biennale? For instance, what's going to happen with this college after this Biennale? Because I heard about testing, I heard about talking, experience, but I wish, and because my question is more a wish than a real question, and to have, for example, in Murano, to recycle this Biennale, to create a college there permanently, because every Biennale, it's really hard when I go and see, for example, on Monday, when the Biennale is over, and I always try to ask them to recycle not only the materials, but the ideas also, and the concept, because we saw very exciting concepts during this Biennale. So what will be with all these ideas? Will be just an exhibition, one more? I hope not, so I'm sure you prepare something for the next, so for all the young people, the students, and all the people who come in Venice at the same time to try to do something and really to change things, I think it will be something, because it's really a semester, and Murano and Venice need a lot of investment, need a lot of, ideas. So that's my wish. I hope this won't end after the Biennale. Thank you.
Thank you for the wish. And I would say that in exactly the same way that the participants of the exhibition, whether young, established practitioners, academics, researchers, whoever, the seeds of thinking are in them. I think this is the first time I've ever been so convinced that an exhibition has given birth to something. And that thing that it's given birth to is actually in every single person who passed through it. And it sounds like a really cheesy response, that somehow the seeds are being taken somewhere else. And I don't think that we are going to see one thing as the result of this. I think we're going to see hundreds of things. And the experience of the college for me was so profound that it has actually radically altered the way I think about my own institute. So I would like to be able to, I will replicate this experience of bringing people together without a certificate, without a validation, without accreditation, without all of the infrastructure of education to provide exactly the kind of space that you're thinking about. And for sure I'm not going to be the only one who will do that. So I think this will live on, and maybe to go to your point, Luca, in ways that we can't predict and expect, and that's the greatest success of it, somehow. So I've got one more question from here. So somebody asks us, did our understanding of the binary global south, global north change in any way, as many of the participants themselves were situated precisely in the fringe between those? And I think that's a really interesting question.
For me, yes. And I think what it sort of made me think about was actually the synergies across rather than sort of north-south, top-bottom. The useful comparisons, the useful dialogues are actually across. Yeah. And that was a real moment. The college really confirmed that for me. I think as young people of the diaspora, you're always aware of that across. You're always aware of having to go between. And I think in the last few years, what I've seen is, well, certainly for me and in my own thinking, I now register that as less of a conflict and something to actually be harnessed. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a real radical shift for a lot of us, not to see this kind of idea of identity as something to be in conflict with, to struggle with, but actually the contradictions that you hold, the kind of binary, the opposites, are all things that actually can be useful ways of thinking. And so to the kind of global north, global south sort of relationship, I think, yes, it did make me rethink it. It made me think about how useful it is actually as a construct, and whether we need new ways of identifying with one another.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'm going to take a couple more questions from the audience, and I've got one final question because I'm aware it's about half an hour after our slotted time. Anyone in the audience?
Thank you. My question was around the people that wanted to participate but were not didn't make it. I think it's something that I've been struggling also as part of education. You know, we all get chances, and you talked about the chances that you got over the people that you've encountered. And you know, Venice is a small space, and it's a little bit exclusivist, you could say. The Biennale, the same. What are your thoughts around, you know, when you get a chance like this? Because for me, this was a lot of what I heard is people who got a chance maybe once, you know, after many generations of wanting to get a chance, and they got a chance. And what are your thoughts around that? Also high-level education, university education, postgraduate education is also oftentimes a chance. Getting to be part of an exhibition is sometimes, you know, chance, and that marks you, that then pushes you forward.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, one exhibition cannot possibly address everyone. One college cannot reach everyone. But in the selection process, we try to navigate that line between saying we're going to reserve a certain number of places from people who would not otherwise be able to come, and a certain number of places from people from the global south for whom this is a different kind of educational pedagogical experience, and at the same time have enough diversity within it that people are able to learn from one another. And if you think about the fastest growing economies in the world right now, actually they're not in Europe and the United States, they're in Africa, they're in Asia, they're in Latin and South America. And so the appetite and the hunger for the education of the 22nd century is going to come from very different territories. And for me, opportunities like this one, as fringe in some ways as they are to the mainstream educational environment, are super important, because they're ways of giving a platform to ideas that are already there. You know, a lot of people talked about the surprise of many of the participants, that they were surprised that they came with such well-formed ideas, such well-formed positions. I think actually a lot of this talent is already there. We just don't know where and how to see it. So for me, this is valuable because it's one, hopefully, of many such examples. And that, I think, is going to, I know there's one more person who wants to ask a question, but it's going to bring me back to my final question here. So if I can take that last question in the audience. Did I see somebody's hand go up in error? Okay. I'm just going to come back to this question. This is to all three of you, that political landscapes across the world have shifted quite significantly over the past few years, not just to the right or to the left, but to combinations of political persuasions that a decade ago were hard to imagine. And one of the great gifts of architectural education, regardless of whether one becomes a practicing architect or not, is the ability and the training to be able to hold contradictory thoughts or ideas together. In other words, architecture teaches you how to put things that often don't belong together. Could we begin to think about architectural education as a foundation subject for citizenship, for example, teaching people not to become architects in the conventional sense, but to structure their views on the world in more nuanced and more complex ways?
I think it's a must, actually. I don't think we have any choice at the moment to do that. It's what we must do. And I think one of the things that always attracted me to studying architecture was the breadth of what you cover. You know, you have to be able to think about history, about language, about place, about origin, about the future, about the present, about the past. You have to be a go-between to a lot of knowledge. And then you have to hold that knowledge and translate in a way that makes sense. And you have to be able to speak to different professions. There are a lot of professions that are about becoming a real specialist and only being able to communicate in that one specialism. But for me, an architect has to be a translator. They have to be able to hold a position where they're able to listen to all these different specialisms and translate that and give a meaning. And that meaning sometimes is formal, as in a building. But increasingly, I think it's becoming a sort of a cultural figure again. And I think that architectural education perhaps has shifted. We need to readdress what it means to practice as an architect and what practice is. And I think about that actually in relation to the first clips we saw when you were talking about the difference between a professional and an amateur. And I think that actually it's going to become more increasingly important to think about being an amateur, to think about the practice of an architect, the doing of. And that doing is, I think it needs to be broader. And for the world that we're going into, for the 22nd century world, the role of the architect needs to become much more of it's a social act, it's a political act, it's a cultural act. It can't just be about the kind of mechanics of production.
I fully agree. In Italy, we have a very well-known primary school based in Reggio Emilia, where they say we do not educate children, we educate a new citizen. So from the age of 3, which means that all the process of education is related to that. And then when you arrive to architecture, you must be aware about the social, political effect that what you do has on everyday life of generation of people for decades. And this makes it even more urgent, no, in terms of that. And in a way, schools do not educate professionals, they educate people. We are talking with person. And I think it's very important because, first of all, they are a person. So much more they are related to the emotion, to the capacity of facing contradiction and to dialogue between conflicts. No? I think that sometimes in our society we are so scared about this idea of being in conflicts. But conflict means diversity, it means listening, it means joining differences into something which is a common project, which means future, and it means hope. No? So all those things are so much related to the fact that the person we are. So I think that today, architectural education, think that today education is a long-term fix. No? You don't finish after 5 years. You educate yourself to techniques continuously. So first of all, since you can upgrade your technical tools daily, the point is which person are you? Which kind of awareness about your architecture are also civic servant, no? And this is very important to be understood. We are not a decorateur, we are not a hairdresser of a good architecture, no? Of good buildings. And this is very important. We should move back from this idea of being ornamental to be substantial in terms of civic and collective awareness. I think this is very important.
I think for me, if there's one wish to go back to the statement earlier that we all come away from these things with wishes. The wish is not that the conversation about this exhibition will be whether it was or it wasn't architecture, but rather that the inclusion of other voices forced a new reckoning for architecture. Whether we've arrived at the end of that reckoning or not, the idea that it's a catalyst for something that is yet to come. Super important. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for so many people for joining us today. And again, just to say an enormous thank you to the participants, all the 70, 75, 80 people who made this college experience possible, and to the Biennale for funding it. Important. Thank you. Good night. Thank you.